Hi there, and welcome to Plant CEO. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome Michelle Edelman, the CEO and founder of Infinite Foods. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Great to have you on the show. So, yeah, you're normally based in South Africa, but at the moment you're in Bangladesh, right?
Yes, I'm in Bangladesh for a couple of weeks.
Nice.
My partner is the U.S. ambassador here, so I split my time between Bangladesh and South Africa and Botswana and our other locations.
Awesome. Yeah, let's start by telling me a little bit about what Infinite Foods is.
So Infinite Foods is a go-to-market platform to be able to promote and distribute plant-based foods across the Sub-Saharan African continent. So we're very much focused with a mission of helping Africa leapfrog to a healthier and more sustainable food system. So we call ourselves a platform versus a distribution company because what we do for our brands that we represent is very comprehensive in terms of doing everything for them from the upfront initial regulatory support all the way through direct selling, support for merchandising, all the way down to the corporate social responsibility side of the house. And we do that, across the continent and really look at the value chain in a very deep way. So everything from distribution, ultimately driving down into manufacturing and raw ingredient production.
And you started this approximately about 2 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we launched just in late 2018. So 2019 was our first full trading year. So, it was fun to go into, year number 2 of trading in 2020 during COVID. But so it was a little bit of a wild ride, but it was a very successful year nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah. And can you tell me about some of the brands that you're working with at the moment? Obviously some very big ones.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we really believe that part of making our platform be successful is we have to have the best tasting food and great brands. So we do represent key category leaders across all of the major food categories. So Beyond Meat is a very big part of our business. We represent both retail and food service lines. Oatly, Miyoko's butter. We're just about ready to launch Upton's and Good Catch. Just Egg will be coming later on this year. So we are really working with the category leaders across all of the major plant-based food categories.
Yeah. And what's been their adoption and which sort of countries are really sort of driving that growth for them?
Yeah, it's been amazing, really. When I first started Infinite Foods a couple of years ago, and I rocked up in California, to all of the plant-based food company headquarters and said, hey, we're going to start this company and we're going to distribute plant-based food in Africa. They all looked at me like I was a little strange. But the adoption has been really fantastic. We have been experiencing over 300% year-over-year growth. And that has to do with, obviously the popularity of the product lines that we're picking and working with. But, across the continent, we are seeing an increased population, we're seeing an increase in protein consumption, and we're seeing an increase in the adoption of plant-based alternatives. So, those things multiplied with our geographic growth, which now is South Africa, Botswana, and Mauritius in the southern SADC area. Kenya, our office in Kenya just opened, and we'll be moving into West Africa, into Ghana and Nigeria later this year.
Yeah. And in terms of those brands like Beyond Meat, for example, part of their product is also the frozen category. Are you also selling those with your retail partners?
Yeah, so most of our lines now are frozen and chilled,
Right.
which of course makes our work very challenging. So
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah, the supply chain.
Yeah, the cold supply chain in Africa in general is very immature. If you measure the Cold chain capacity. They usually do it in terms of, cubic meters of cold storage capacity per person. I mean, I don't know the exact statistic off the top of my head, but Africa is operating at like 20% of like the rest of the world. So part of the challenge of building our business is also building particularly the last mile cold chain capabilities, which really are non-existent. And it gets even further complicated by the fact that in a lot of the markets that we operate, including in South Africa, which is probably the most sophisticated of the retail markets in Africa, 50% of food distribution is in informal markets. Right. So it's in, small street vendors, in distributed locations. So not only do we have to tackle the problem of maintaining a good, solid cold supply chain, we have to tackle the problem of how do we do that both in formal and in informal markets.
Yeah. So how would it work in informal markets where they don't have, a frozen, chiller to put everything in?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
Oh,
so it's one of our big initiatives for this year, which is to kind of map out our strategy around the cold supply chain, because you're right, most of these vendors are working with non-perishable products.
Right.
And to some extent, they'll work with fresh fruits and vegetables, but they're not working with fresh fruits and vegetables that have to be, refrigerated, on their stand or be kept overnight. They basically buy what they need for the day and sell what they need for the day. So one of the things that we're looking at is that model. Like, are we bringing the chilled products to them, or is there a pickup model? And then once we've enabled these informal vendors with chilled cold storage capacity, what other things can we support them with, right? So what are the other key products, and they may not just be food, that would be important that the vendors could be providing as a service into their community where cold storage is necessary.
Yeah, I'll quite like, if there was this like pickup model where, they could sell the product in the markets and then say, okay, you need to go there, do the payments on their mobile phone, because that's quite mature now in Africa, and just go to a centralized location that isn't hopefully too far from the market, that they can just pick it up. If exactly. It's not too much.
So I'll tell you what, we'll have a bet next year. We'll mark this day,
right.
February 22nd, 2022. We'll have a complete conversation about last mile cold chain.
Okay, let's do that. And what's quite good then, I guess, in some, countries, specifically South Africa, the retail distribution is a little bit wider, I think. But it'd be good to talk about, who are your main retailers that you're working with, and obviously the restaurant chains, which would be quite cool as well.
Yeah. So, in Southern Africa is probably the most organized from a formal retail perspective. But as I said, 50% of South Africa retail is formalized through a number of key players. So 98% of that formal retailing is actually going through 4 players. So it's not quite as bad as, say, Australia, that has a duopoly of really 2 major retailers. But, in South Africa, we really have 4 major retailers. Right. So there's, ShopRite, Checkers, the Spar Group, the Pick and Pay Group, and Woolworths. And then you've got Food Lovers, kind of coming in after that. And then we have one major dominant commercial food service distributor in the form of Bid Food. So it's quite a monopolistic system. And we're seeing adoption of plant-based foods across all of those major retail chains. We happen to have a very strong relationship with Woolworths, which is featuring the Beyond brand, but we really work with all of the retailers with the breadth of our product offering. And we are seeing some really amazing uptake. One of the retailers told me that their line of frozen plant-based food products was the fastest moving product in their frozen category. So there definitely is movement on the shelf. And right now, because of the price point of most plant-based food products, we're very much narrowed to, your upper middle class segment of the market. And that's the segment of the market that is shopping in the formal retail sector. But certainly over the coming year and going into next year, we're really expecting to see prices of plant-based foods to come down, which is going to really open up the market segments in terms of getting to a larger part of the middle class and ultimately the working class. So we're very excited. For example, this year we're going to be launching with Good Dot, which is a shelf-stable plant-based meat substitute, which is in the form of a chunk. And while ground meat products are fairly popular in Southern Africa, the further north you move, the less popular they become.
Right.
Kind of hamburger is not really a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so we're really excited about products like Good Dot, Veggie Victory, which you know of, which is launched now in Nigeria with their early generation products, are now offering the African consumer a plant-based meat alternative that fits into traditional dishes, which are primarily stews and curries. And so we believe that shelf-stable meat chunk market is going to really open up a bunch of new consumers in the plant-based food space.
Yeah. I'm definitely obviously excited about that space as well, and seeing how all those chunk products can be used in the traditional stews that are made, and how it absorbs all the flavors of the stew broth as well. So yeah, it's an important segment, and also that is shelf stable, I think is a key one. But it's great that you're in so many retailers. And in terms of general food trends that you're seeing in Africa, I guess it varies from, like you say, from country to country. But where would you say they are in each of the markets that you're looking to operate as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to think about Africa is that in general, Africans are not huge meat eaters, as a populace. So it partially goes back to traditional diets, which were fairly meat light. Traditionally, Africa, we all were hunter gatherers, right? But rather meat light in terms of diet. And if you look at statistics from the FAO, for example, 60% at a macro level, 60% of people's diets is already plant-based. So it's vegetables and starchy vegetables. The next 20%, unfortunately, is sugar and cooking oil. So if you think about it at a macro level, people's diets is 80%, starchy carbohydrates, starchy vegetables, cooking oil and sugar. And that only leaves, the remaining 20% has to cover all of your meat, dairy, fresh fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, etc. So what we're seeing though so just to put it in context, 325 million Americans consume more meat than all of the continent of Africa, right? So almost now 1 billion consumers, and Americans consume in aggregate more meat than all of Africa. But that consumption is changing, and it's changing as people's diets change, as more people are moving into the middle class. The statistics say that meat consumption is increasing at about 4% per annum. So, and we have a population that's growing very fast. So the population in Africa is growing at about 2.5 times faster than the rest of the world. So you have this multiplier effect of more people moving into the middle class and people consuming more meat as part of their diets. So this is why we believe as Infinite Foods, we're in this very important inflection point where we can help Africa leapfrog to a healthier and more sustainable future. Because effectively, most farming on the continent is still smallholder and generally regenerative. And we don't have the presence of the big industrial agriculture factory farming system that you have, say, in the West. So we don't feel right now kind of the acute impact of industrialized agriculture on our health, right? On the overuse of antibiotics and growth hormones, for example, in meat and dairy, by the environmental effect of having, very intensive animal agriculture, but it's got to come, right? So if you're going to feed 1 billion people that are growing at more between 2 and 5% per annum and increasing their consumption, something's going to start to break. And that's why we believe that from a strategic perspective, we're sitting at the right place in the right time. Because just like Africa was able to leapfrog from, no phones to cell phones and move from, no banking to mobile banking, we believe that we can move to, a diet that is largely plant-based today to a diet where meat and dairy consumption is plant-based, and therefore have a healthier and more resilient society.
So I know, having spoken with Hakeem from Veggie Victory, he also speaks about electricity supply. Once the power stations and the supply becomes more stable, he's predicting that there will be more animal farming coming into Africa, like in Nigeria, for example. Would you agree on that statement, that it's also to do with energy supply, and then that will then bring this more industrialized processes to Africa as well?
Well, I don't know that energy is the key, although Hakeem very well may be right that, the lack of energy, which ties into really the immaturity of the cold chain infrastructure,
right,
is the key. The challenge is really economic development, right? So unlike the Western world, in the US, only 2% of people are in commercial farming. In Africa, 50 to 60% of people are in agriculture, and they're smallholder farmers. So it's defined as the only income or nutrition that person gets is from the what they farm.
Right.
And so one of the challenges is looking for overall economic growth on the continent, because to move people away from farming and away from fairly low intensity and low productivity farming to higher productivity farming, well, higher productivity farming actually needs fewer people. So you have to create other economic diversification, other economic growth, so that there are jobs for those people. So just to compare and contrast it, for example, to Bangladesh, where I'm sitting right now, very similar situation where traditionally, more than 50% of people were smallholder farmers. But what you see here, for example, in South Asia, is the tremendous growth of the apparel industry and of manufacturing industries, which is pulling people out of farming and into manufacturing jobs. And that's then making way and enabling mechanization and improved seed production and productivities to happen at the agricultural level. Because it's hard to push those productivity improvements if it means job loss in the African context. So it's quite complicated in terms of what the agricultural opportunity is, because it's tied to the overall economic growth of these countries. And it's important to note, though, that if we think about the whole plant-based food space, one of the things that I believe that the growth of the plant-based food category is going to do is it's going to introduce new opportunities for new commodity products. So if we're going to eat our hamburgers made out of peas and our eggs made out of mung beans and our milk made out of oats, well, somebody's got to grow the peas and the mung beans and the oats. And Africa is actually in a really good catbird seat to capture that opportunity. Because in many ways we don't have those big commercialized, industrialized systems, maybe for the first time, our lack of infrastructure becomes a strength and not a barrier.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely see that.
A U.S. soy and maize farmer whose income, for example, on the maize side, very well may be tied to ethanol prices, not even to food. they're not really motivated to turn on a dime and say, oh, let's grow peas and mung beans instead. Whereas in Africa, we're sitting on 25% of the world's arable land, but only 10% of the yields. So we have the opportunity to take the existing agricultural land, and we're not talking about, clearing the rainforest to make way for agriculture. We're talking about existing arable land, make that land more productive, and move these farmers into new types of commodities that will allow them to have a more sustainable livelihood. So this is why, from a platform perspective, we are so interested in looking at plant-based food, not only from a consumption perspective and a distribution perspective, but ultimately driving that opportunity all the way down to the ingredient level.
And when we think about like crops and ingredients, I know we've spoken before about the cashews market in Africa being quite big, but not necessarily are they always been purchased from Africa, but most of the cashews in the world are coming from middlemen, right, in Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of agricultural commodities are just like natural resource commodities in Africa. Where diamonds are shipped off the continent to be cut and polished in Antwerp and then sent to India to be made into jewelry. Unfortunately, a lot of times our agricultural commodities are the same. So 55% of the world's cashews are grown in Africa. So between Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Mozambique, you've got the majority of the world's cashews being produced. But for the most part, they're being shipped to Vietnam, to middlemen that are doing the processing, that are doing the grading, and then selling on to the buyers. So one of the things that we're trying to do is intermediate or disrupt that supply chain and try to connect the plant-based food companies directly with the increasingly more processors are being put in place on the continent that enables a California plant-based dairy company to be able to buy directly from a group that is directly supporting smallholder farmers.
Yeah, that's awesome. And part of your company will be to create like a manufacturing hub as well. Can you speak a little bit about that and where you see that going?
Yeah, so there's two big strategic initiatives that we're working on over the next 2 years. So one of it is what we're calling our affiliate program. So we believe very strongly in an industry like the plant-based food space where it's so nascent and really, despite all the buzz, those of us who live in this world, we would think that everybody on the planet is, eating Beyond Burgers and drinking Oatly. But, the statistics are telling us that it's, single digit, purchasing, even at the US retail level. So we believe if we're going to create a movement and really get people to switch their diets, we need to make as many opportunities available to the consumer for them to try and fall in love with plant-based food. So as part of our initiatives, we're looking to develop and incubate local brands across the continent so that we can have great local brands that can sit side by side with our international brands. And we're starting that initiative in South Africa, but we will be rolling out that initiative across all of the major countries that we operate. And that initiative is about empowering local entrepreneurs. A lot of our young entrepreneurs are female entrepreneurs, which I'm very proud of. About 80% of the companies that we're currently starting to work with are all run by our female-led and founded companies, which is obviously something near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
But we also believe that then starts to create a credible manufacturing base for plant-based food and to build those plant-based food manufacturing skills. And it's, we can talk more about that program, but we believe that we can create strong plant-based manufacturing hubs in Africa. So again, we're starting in South Africa and we'll be looking at, other sites in both East and West Africa. But South Africa offers plant-based food manufacturers in a great, offshore, if you like, opportunity to manufacture plant-based food. So we have good water infrastructure. We do have good power infrastructure. There's a history of food processing in South Africa. We have major ports which enable export. We have favorable trade terms with the EU, and we can produce product. Our estimates are at about a 30% cost savings at a cost of goods sold level for, say, a cashew-based dairy product. Because the cashews are sitting on our doorstep. And so we would like to see manufacturing of plant-based foods in Africa, not only for distribution across Africa, but also as an economic development and growth opportunity to export those products, from Africa into Europe. And that South Africa and different African countries could become plant-based food manufacturing hubs for international companies to have low cost, but high quality and traceable manufacturing that's sitting right where the ingredients are.
Yeah, I think that also, that needs to happen when you're looking at also the population demand and growth there. I think the decision for, the big US plant-based companies would be, for Europe, for example, where they might set up shop create a manufacturing hub in, say, Amsterdam, is like, how long could they support the African market with the production being in Amsterdam? Or when should they consider that point of switching to a local opportunity in Africa, for example? So, and then it's about, well, where's the manufacturing expertise? So I think I would imagine that's where maybe the questions will come, but it's the challenges that needs to be overcome, I guess.
Yeah. So we will be launching, knock on wood, in 2021, our first major manufacturing agreement with one of the category leading brands in South Africa. And in this case, we're actually working with an existing manufacturer who is manufacturing a similar product. So we're able to tap into effectively a co-packing network,
right.
To be able to get this. You got to start somewhere, right?
Right.
So, rather than build a big greenfield, plant-based manufacturing, facility, we're starting by working with existing manufacturers who have expertise and capacity in similar product lines, seeding that with affiliate brands, and hopefully with one or more of these international brands, and that's what gets the ball rolling, establishes your credibility, and then creates a base for you to scale up from.
Right. And thinking about the incubator, what sort of companies are you looking for? What would you like to see the types of companies coming forward with your expertise in the plant-based arena already?
So, we're looking across all of the major categories, but in particularly for us right now, we're really focused on a lot of plant-based dairy alternatives.
Right.
And we're looking at the dairy alternatives for a couple of reasons. One is plant-based dairy, we believe, is one of the most important categories that we can promote in Africa, because the lactose intolerance level across the African community is incredibly high. According to statistics, at least 80% of Africans are lactose intolerant.
Wow, that's huge.
And it's huge, right? Yeah. It's huge. And most of them don't know it, right? Most people don't know they're lactose intolerant. And, what's interesting is that we are seeing rise of diabetes and heart disease and other lifestyle related diseases that very well may be also tied to lactose intolerance, because people are consuming lactose, they have a lot of inflammation in their system, and it has a knock-on effect on all sorts of other health issues.
Yeah. And so let's also not forget that, humans are the only species that drinks milk from another species, which is kind of a bit weird.
It's a little strange, right? So we believe this plant-based dairy category is a really important category for overall health. The other thing is a lot of plant-based dairy alternatives are chilled and not frozen. So it makes international distribution much more difficult to get started, because they'll generally have shorter shelf life because they're not frozen, and therefore it just makes the whole supply chain more complicated when you're in an import distribution business. When products can be frozen or they're shelf stable, it's much easier, load up a container, stick it in the freezer, load up a container, stick it in the warehouse, and, start distributing the product. So it's a lot more straightforward than when you've got, product that might have 6 months or less shelf life. You lose a month and a half on the water, right? So by the time you pick it up from the manufacturing plant, get it on the boat, get it across, get it out of customs, you've lost 45 days. So if you have a product that has less than 6 months shelf life, you've already lost a month and a half of that shelf life. So the other main reason is we believe that, we can get more plant-based butters, plant-based yogurts, plant-based ice creams that need to be chilled and have shorter shelf life, especially if you want to manufacture them without a lot of preservatives.
Yeah, I mean, that's the direction that a lot of companies would like to go for, especially obviously the plant-based ones, to have natural ingredients for sure. So in terms of, I guess, just going back to the incubator side, is some of the challenges, or do you see some of the challenges with starting those companies with the talent, especially when you're looking at, I guess, people and students coming out of university with who are food scientists? I mean, I would like to see the universities investing more on this side. So I think, do you think that needs to be encouraged?
Yeah, and I think that's why we're looking at, we have to look at this as an ecosystem. Because let's face it, the innovation happens where the money flows. So, there's a huge amount of innovation that's happening in California, right? Why? Because tech money is flowing into the category. There's a lot of innovation happening in the US, in Europe. That's where the money is flowing, and that's where the human resource talent is in terms of food scientists and entrepreneurs who can, put these things together and create companies. In Southern Africa, we have fewer of those resources. Our education levels at a broad scale are not nearly as sophisticated. We don't, we're not cranking out, tens of thousands of food scientists. And, similarly on the entrepreneurial side, we're continuing to try to develop an entrepreneurial culture and an entrepreneurial spirit. And you need both, right? You need the technology and you need the entrepreneurs. And frankly, they need access to capital and markets. And let's face it, doing business on the Sub-Saharan African markets is not easy, right? I mean, I talk about it as like a thing, but it's not a thing. It's 54 different countries, each of which have their own issues and opportunities, right? Different countries, different currency, different regulation, different supply chains, different players, different culture, different gaps in the marketplace, different ease of being able or unease of being able to do business, different security concerns. So, if you're a small, say, South African or Nigerian, startup company, even trying to navigate within the continent, just because you're in Nigeria or South Africa doesn't mean it's any easier, to get to Kenya. So we have to recognize that we're working in this very complex distribution environment. And part of the value that we offer to the affiliates is to try to smooth the way for them to get scale, not only in their local countries, but ultimately on a regional level, a Pan-African level, and ultimately we'd like to develop them so they can compete on the international stage. So as part of the incubation program that we are developing, we're looking at developing angel level funding for these companies because access to finance is difficult. We're looking at creating university relationships, both within Africa, but also with US and European universities. We're going to hopefully launch this year what we're calling our Infinite Foods Fellows Program, where we're going to provide an opportunity for food scientists to be able to come to Africa and work with our affiliates so they can get some hands-on experience and working side by side, and our affiliates can get access to that expertise. And then obviously we're supporting them with the sales and distribution of their products. So we really have to look at this very holistically in terms of giving these entrepreneurs the business support they need, the financial support they need, access to tech R&D, access to sales and distribution so that they can scale their businesses and hopefully be really successful.
Yeah, sounds great. And will you be looking to raise a separate fund for like your incubator that external investors could invest in?
Yeah, so we're going to develop a specific, SPV for the affiliates, and there'll probably be kind of two different types of fund. There's going to be an angel fund, because a lot of what these affiliates need is, they need cash to get stuff done, and it's that kind of angel level investments it's really hard to come by in Africa. So, small amounts of seed capital that enable them to get started and get things done. And then we're going to do a separate fund that'll be more focused around hard asset development. So the next challenge, once you've got your product and you're getting some traction, you've built your brand, the next big challenge is how do you scale up manufacturing? So, that second fund will be very much tied to getting them access to hard assets through, asset financing, access to manufacturing capacity, so that they can scale the businesses in a sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what's your background story?
Oh gosh, it gets really complicated. So I've been living and working in Africa since 2012. I'm American. The accent always gives it away. And I really spent the first, 25 years of my career at Accenture, the big management consulting company, and had, fantastic opportunity to really get a lot of global experience. I worked with a lot of CPG companies, and it was really a wonderful place to kind of build your business skills and prepare yourself for doing something crazy like, moving to Africa and building food and ag tech businesses. But I started a small boutique investment firm called Excite in 2012, really focused around trying to build food and ag tech businesses in Africa. I do quite a bit of nonprofit work. And one of the challenges that we always came across as we're trying to work particularly with orphan and vulnerable children was if we didn't create an environment where the mothers in particular had some financial security, a lot of the investments that we were trying to make with children kind of fell to the wayside. And you didn't create that sustainable change that you were looking for. And so in 2012, I became very motivated to kind of put my money where my mouth was and to try to build those types of businesses that would create employment for women, both young entrepreneurs as well as people in the working class. And so, since, for the last number of years, this is all I've done. So our big flagship ag business is in Botswana called Go Fresh. And it's a fresh produce company where we use controlled environment and greenhouse technology to grow fresh produce in the desert. And so we have effectively disrupted the supply chain of growing fresh produce in a country, which is kind of cool.
What are you growing, by the way?
So we grow anything that would go in your salad, right? So leafy greens and lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, culinary herbs, and we service both the local market as well as the high-end tourist market, the safari industry in Botswana.
Nice. Yeah, good. So yeah, great background there on working with the big CPGs and also today with the the manufacturing of those salad greens, which is all helpful for the plant-based business.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you talking about all the things that you're working on. And yeah, I'm going to hold you to that date for next year.
Hold me to that date, February. All right, I got the team rocking and rolling.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, thank you again, and see you soon.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much. All right, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.